Today we're talking about AI on the battlefield, guardrails, government authority, and the future of public-private defense partnerships. Obviously, an issue that has been in the news and in the media and in the courts over the last few weeks. So thrilled to be here. AI is obviously central to intelligence analysis, military planning, and operational decision making. We're going to increasingly depend on close collaboration between government and our private sector partners in executing military operations on the battlefield. We've already seen that in Venezuela. We're seeing that in Iran now, although we're in a little bit of a pause, although maybe less of a pause today than yesterday. And look, it's important to understand how frontier AI systems will interact with our military warfighters on the field, as well as our decision makers in DC and battlefield commanders as well. These aren't hypothetical questions. We've seen it actually play out. And so our event today brings together national security practitioners, leading AI developers to explore the current moment, what the current moment reveals about the technology, about the capability, about operational decision making, and about our policies that you all set in this domain. So I'm going to keep it a conversational sort of scenario. So I'm going to introduce all the panel members, and we'll jump into questions. We'll have time at the end for questions from you all. But the goal here is to keep the conversation rolling. So look, immediately to my right is Sam Hammond. Sam is the chief economist at the Foundation for American Innovation, where I'm on the board, where he focuses on AI and the institutional impact of emerging technology. Sam, thanks for being here. Immediately to Sam's right is Nathan Lemur. Nathan is the CEO of Fixed Gear Strategies and the executive director of the Digital First Project. He previously served as a policy advisor to FCC Chairman Ajit Pai and has deep experience at the intersection of technology, policy, and government. Immediately to Nathan's right is Katrina Mulligan. Katrina is the head of the National Security Partnerships at OpenAI for Government. Before that, she served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflicts, so she knows a lot about what we're doing right now and we've done recently. And she held senior roles at the National Security Division at DOJ and ODNI and the National Counterterrorism Center, where she worked for my old boss, Matt Olson. And then last but certainly not least,
my old boss.
Our mutual old boss, Matt Olson.
He's amazing.
He is amazing. And immediately to her right, and last but certainly not least, is Major General Charlie Cleveland. General Cleveland is a senior counselor at Palantir Technologies and a principal at Palace Advisors. He spent more than 3 decades in the military. Thank you for your service, and including leadership roles at JSOC, NGA, and ODNI. So thank you for being here. So we'll just jump right in. And again, please do be thinking of your questions, because we'll have time at the end for your questions. So before we jump in, let's just take a moment to level set, right? AI tools are obviously being used across military operations and the national security ecosystem. We've seen recent reports of AI-enabled tools being used to locate personnel in the field during the recent downing of an American fighter jet over Iran. We've seen them used to engage in target analysis, provide potential courses of action. What's the current landscape of AI on the battlefield look like? I'm going to turn to you first, Sam. Actually, let me start with General Cleveland. Since we have a general on the panel, better start battlefield questions with the general. So, General, talk to us about how AI is being used today on the battlefield. What does it look like, and what should we understand at core about how these tools are being used today?
Yeah, first off, thanks for the time. And in terms of being a journalist, some in the audience know that I know already. I wasn't much of one, but very happy to be a part of all this. So thanks for doing this. I think if you went across the battlefield today, what you would find is AI is being used across every single battlefield operating system. While not quite as glamorous, you see it in human resources and being able to track readiness. You certainly see it in intelligence, be it collection orchestration or assisting with analysis. You see it in operations. I think what gets the most publicity really is targeting, and there's certainly a lot on that, but there's a lot more to it. It's used in course of action development. It's used in a number of the operational aspects, and it's used in logistics. And so a lot of the logistics work that is being done on the battlefield right now is tied into AI as well. I think you would see a significant increase, right, wrong, or indifferent, over the last 6 months. I think if you went out on the battlefield last October and you saw it, it would look very different than what you see today based on the real-world experiences that have come out of Venezuela and out of Iran. The other component, though, I think is you would see it applied very unevenly. And so I don't think you would find one command that is able to do everything I just described. What you'd find is pockets, one command doing X, another command doing Y. I think you certainly see a broad intent and very specific direction coming from leaders that they want to be involved in this, and they simply are trying to figure out how to move their commands towards this and be able to integrate all this. So in some, bottom line is I think you'd find it used in locations throughout the battlefield, but it's applied very differently at various locations, and it still has a ways to go before it's fully adopted.
So, given that, Sam, I'm interested to think about the guardrails. This has been a topic in the news of late. We saw the dust up between Anthropic and DOW, and the questions about the use of tools. How should we think about guardrails in the context of the kind of national security operation that General Cleveland was just talking about? And in particular, how should you think about whose role it is to put in place the guardrails and how those guardrails get enforced when it's the government on one side and a private company on the other?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Stepping back and separating the different types of AI that are used in the battlefield, there's just this broader distinction between narrow AI and general AI. We've had smart weapons for years, and they're very precise, they're very controllable, and we know how they work.
JDAMs.
Yes, exactly. And then we also have this other category of generalist models, agentic models, like are produced by the large language model providers that are very different in kind. And I think one of the interesting things about this development is you and I and everyone in this room has access to essentially the frontier of this category of technology. The labs may have
Every day, literally.
every day, literally. I mean, there's the new Mythos model that Anthropic is rolling out. Spud
Or not
is-
rolling
well,
out.
to
Yeah,
select
I was
partners.
gonna say, I'm not sure you
Rolling
have
out-
access to that.
Well, it illustrates what I'm trying to illustrate is that there's not a secret skunk works where these models are super advanced, above and beyond what you all have access to. And so everyone in this room has some intuitive sense, if you've used ChatGPT or if you've used Claude, of what these models are good at, what they're capable of, where their weaknesses are, where their limitations are, that they still hallucinate, that they still, while they will clean up your inbox, they will make mistakes. And so there's this
Delete your inbox.
yeah, exactly. So there's this question, in the DOW Anthropic case where they had these two red lines, one around domestic mass surveillance, one around lethal autonomous weapons, where, at least at the current state of the technology, it's sort of a moot point about who sets these guardrails, in part because no one is connecting Claude to a lethal autonomous weapon.
Which is why it's so weird that we had this massive public bloodbath between the CEO of a major American company, one of 3 or
Right.
4 major labs, 5 labs maybe, and the Secretary of Defense himself and one of his key assistant secretaries. I mean, over something that isn't a thing.
Right, and I interpret this in part as trying to, your first day at high school and picking a fight, right? It's trying to establish the chain of command.
Try to show who's the
Who's
bully and
boss.
who's boss.
Right, but before these technologies get more advanced, where they are conceivably being attached to autonomous weaponry, and they've picked an enemy, and now they've backed themselves into this paradoxical position where Anthropic is considered both a supply chain risk and also so essential to military readiness that they can't live without it.
Right. Exquisite capabilities, but a supply chain risk along the lines of Huawei, ZTE, and Kaspersky. It's a weird place to be.
Especially post-Mythos, where, because they're rolling out in a limited partnership with large critical infrastructure providers, in part because it has these superb hacking abilities, we want to give it first to critical infrastructure providers to patch their bugs before it becomes widespread. You could say make the same case that we need something like that in government, a differential access program where these capabilities, as they roll out, are first deployed to fix DOW, Pentagon, civilian IT systems, because when these capabilities arise, there's essentially a clock that ticks before there's an open source alternative that is mass proliferated.
Yeah. So Katrina, we, when you and I were on a panel up here on Capitol Hill maybe a year or two ago, we talked about national security use of AI, and at that point, OpenAI was not working directly with the Department of Defense or Department of War now, and that's changed. It's changed. It changed over time, even before that, and it's changed since the fight between the very public fight between one of your competitors and DOW. Tell us to the extent you can, either about the internal thinking or what you said externally about why that change has happened and what it means for OpenAI as a company to be prepared to and work with government national security entities.
So it's kind of rooted, for me at least, in our mission to benefit all of humanity. Our belief, we actually have a conviction that benefiting all of humanity requires democracies to continue to have the lead on this technology. And we don't see a way for that to be enabled that doesn't involve frontier AI labs working directly with national security stakeholders. That's a key element in the equation. I think it's worth sort of pointing out, and I may have even said this when we talked 2 years ago, but it remains true. This is the first time in American history that a technology of this consequence has been developed exclusively by the private sector with no government involvement. Right. If you actually go back and think about the advent of electricity, the internet, GPS, the Human Genome Project, I mean, I could go on. at every one of those, major junctures, the government, typically through the Department of Defense, had a seat at the frontier table. They were a stakeholder in the development of the technology, and they are not.
If not having funded it almost wholly historically.
And that is what I think underpins a part of the problem that that Sam really sort of talked about, which is that government is in this weird situation right now where there is a fundamental need that they have to leverage this technology for national security purposes, and to do so in ways that require the AI labs to sort of collaborate on things like guardrails and how these models operate in sensitive contexts. But they don't actually have a seat at the table of developing the technology. They're not particularly knowledgeable about what it does and doesn't do. And so they're
Concerning on its own.
But also understandable, because if you're not developing it, I mean, if you're outside of the AI ecosystem, if you're not thinking about it all day, every day, you don't know what's happening with it.
You can't keep up.
You can't keep up. And people in government understandably have other parts of their jobs besides just thinking about this one technology. So, they also lack meaningful mechanisms to measure and evaluate how the models are progressing and what they can be safely and responsibly used for. And so there is this tension that I think exists right now between the AI labs needing to being objectively more knowledgeable about what the capabilities are and what they aren't, because these models do not progress evenly as they develop. They get better at some things, but they don't get better at all things. And we in the AI labs have a better sight picture, a more complete sight picture of what those risks really are. And the government wants to underwrite some of those risks. And I give the government a lot of credit there, because we've often had governments that were especially executive branches, that were relatively unwilling to underwrite risk at times where their unwillingness to change things actually created more risk than they were really acknowledging.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some degree of risk that they can't underwrite here fully, because when the first time these models, get something really wrong, the first time these models are used in a way that ends up, costing a life or many lives, that is going to be a shared reputational hit, regardless of what
For the companies and government, you
Yes.
mean?
And so I think there's this sense of like a core tension that we haven't yet worked out. And my argument has always been we need to be thinking about a different form of public-private partnership than we've ever actually had before.
Yeah, tell us what you mean, because people always talk about public-private partnerships. It's a great buzzword, but it really turns on what you mean. So what do you mean, like a different kind? What does that look like?
I mean, I would say that our company doesn't have like a public position that we've taken on what exactly that should look like. I think we are actually thinking through this right now,
Sure.
and I would imagine that we'll have more deeper thoughts. I think what I mean personally is we need to be thinking about how we develop capabilities in classified environments, the existence of which is a secret. And I think that there are some capabilities, we could train these models to be exquisitely good at things there's no commercial application for, and the government is eventually going to need some of the that type of exquisite capability. Today, we're not yet doing that in the way that I mean. There's little pockets of things that are happening, fine-tuning a model here or there.
Yeah.
I'm talking about actually training models on government data, like classified government data, to be exquisitely good at things that only have relevance in intelligence or national security context.
Only have the detail that those tools can provide.
Right, because you're never going to have models that are going to get good enough at certain types of things if they're only trained on public data.
You got to train them on signals intelligence data, on data from satellites and the like.
Exactly. And I think that type of partnership requires a level of trust and a level of integration that I don't see yet. And so I think that's a real opportunity for where things could go. We are certainly, I think, at our lab and at some of the other AI labs trying to build the kinds of teams that could do that kind of work. But the other issue is that none of the departments or agencies are funded to do things at that level of depth right now. Right now, AI is largely being funded by the departments and agencies as an IT line item. It's really about like licensing and that sort of thing. If you really want to go deep, if you really want to do custom bespoke model development, if you really want to like get in there and do end-to-end enterprise workflow transformations, you have to fund AI like a capability. And that is a sort of structural shift that I'm not seeing yet play out in the budget. And that is, I think, another foundational thing that's going to need to change.
If only we had authorizers and appropriators in the room who could do that thing. Nathan, let me ask you this. So, and John, because I see you want to jump in here, but let me just ask Nathan real quick. So, Nathan, one of the things that we've sort of been discussing, I think, between Katrina and Sam is this question of who decides, right? Is it the private sector? Is it the public sector? Is it a collaboration, as Katrina describes, about given that the AI companies know more about what the model capabilities are in some ways? Maybe some companies even view themselves as the sort of the keepers of the holy flame of AI, right? And don't touch it because you'll get burnt, but we can give it to you as a high priest of AI. But there's clearly something to it, right? In the sense that like none of us on the outside, even as deep as we might get into AI, can keep up with the technology as fast as it develops. We're not seeing the leading edge stuff, even though there aren't necessarily models that we're not seeing today. They're in development, and there are people within the companies and the sort of the PhD level researchers who are building these things, who understand them better. Whose role is it to make the call, in your view, Nathan? And then second, depending on whose role it is, how do we get the information those people need into their hands to make the right calls, right? So if the point is, the point that Anthropic made, that their models aren't ready to be attached to lethal autonomous weapons, they just aren't capable of doing that or not going to deliver the right results. If we determine the decider is the Department of War, how do you get the information that comes out of those companies to really understand the capabilities and its limitations to make the right call?
So thank you again for having me. Really appreciate this discussion. I think, Jamil, you actually have standing room only, so congratulations on that.
Winning, all right, like it.
I would start with there. The first part of the AI discourse that I think is so important, is important for conversations in civilian life, and I think it's also important in terms of the military and Department of War, is the fact that there needs to be a lot of humility in the conversation. And I think one of the things is that there are a group of people who've been thinking about this for 24/7 for a long period of time. That's fair.
To be fair, humility doesn't seem to be the order of the day on the company side or on the government side right now.
Let me start with those who are telling us how to think about things, about AI. We created it. We know more than you. We are prophets. We are the oracles. Look, I have a 13-year-old daughter. I'm not going to cut through to her if I'm telling her it has to be my way or the highway. I have to spend time, even with my child, to explain to them how to think things through and explain kind of here's where we're at, here's what's going on. And also my teenager, believe it or recorded because she might hear this one day. Sometimes she informs me that I'm wrong. And again,
and you're actually wrong.
And I'm wrong. No, she's totally right. I overthought something. I didn't think something through. I think a lot of the back and forth over Department of War and Anthropic looks back at the terms of service that was agreed to in the original part of this under the Biden administration. This is not to be a partisan thing, but look back at the terms of service. And what I see in this is a discussion between the current Department of War and Anthropic being like, hold on, this terms of service means X. If I want to do that, what does that mean long term? If there is, I think the example that was used was, if there was an overnight attack and I need lasers enabled by AI to defend us, can you do that? Well, you have to call us first. That sort of like conversation, I think, exemplifies to me the idea that if you don't see it the way the oracles do, then you are an idiot who shouldn't have any ability to participate in this conversation. You're called an unserious person. But if you're also someone from in the regulatory space, the agencies or Congress, and you're like, wait, hold on, I have a part of this conversation too. They need to be part of that discussion. Now, we can debate whether what Department of War did or didn't do was the right avenue going forward. But to
be fair, calling an American leading AI company a supply chain risk isn't sort of.
As I said, I'm not here to determine whether that was the right call or not. But what I am getting at, it goes to your idea about the guardrails and conversations of who controls that. I think that is a holistic conversation. It's one that we're having over the AI framework in Congress. We're having that in our everyday lives. Every family is having that conversation with their own children. Like, that's my point, is that this reveals to me this sort of like two factions that need to have that humility when in discussions about this. And again, blame on both sides for the way that it has come out. But to me, it starts with that kind of central conversation. If you are the oracle and you are the ones that you determine the ethics of this, the morality of this, how it should play out, you need to have that humility to understand you are explaining to people they have no autonomy in that conversation.
The problem with oracles is they're very rarely humble.
They are very rarely humble, and that's actually a huge part of it.
So
can I jump in?
Please.
So I have a lot of complicated feelings about the way that this particular episode played out, but I do also have some empathy for the situation that my competitor found themselves in, which is, and I want to since they're not represented on this particular panel, I want to give voice to some of what I think is harder about this than has come out in the conversation so far, which is that if the government uses their technology in a way and gets it wrong, if that, event with the girls' school had been Claude's fault, which I'm glad it wasn't, that has serious reputational damage for them that the government can't protect them from.
And their workers,
And their workers, and so many other things. And so they have a right, I think, and an obligation to approach that with some, serious thought. And I also have, wrestled with some of these same questions. OpenAI has taken a different approach in how we've engaged with government on this. We've also taken a lot of heat for the choices that we've made
internally and externally.
And I think there's something that folks fundamentally need to know that's relevant to this discussion and often missed by people who live outside of these companies. I wouldn't have understood this before I was on the inside. There are maybe I don't know what the number would be, 250 or 300 people in the world that actually know how to make this technology at the leading edge and to advance it. And they are spread throughout these AI labs.
Almost all here in the U.S., other than sort of a chunk in China. Is that right?
That's right. And I would say at least half of them are not U.S. persons. They don't have a monolithic view of who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, of who, of what we should and shouldn't be doing on national security. They have, and they get a vote. They are all, many of them are extremely wealthy at this point. They don't have to work.
They get a vote with their feet, you mean?
They get a vote with their feet. And I think, this idea that these AI companies can just dictate to our workforces that we're doing X and you have to get in line or get, that's not the way that this can work. And I do think that these events have really led to a lot of very difficult conversations inside of all of these companies, my company as well. And I don't necessarily think it's been, net positive, even if you like the outcomes in some cases, because I do think that there is a real tension inside these companies about how these decisions are going to get made, about what the consequences are going to be, and how to minimize harm from the use of this technology. And so I just want to express that there's more empathy to be had for what it's like to be building the technology without government and having government come to you and say, we need to use it for these very high stakes decisions, and you can't tell us anything about how to put limits on it. There's one way to look at that where you're like, who should get to decide? The democratically elected leaders of a government. And there's another way to look at it that's like, you're asking us to assume a tremendous amount of risk for extremely high stakes things that you don't really fully understand, and that's obvious to us. And so that's why I get back to there needs to be humility on both sides, and an ability to engage in a trust relationship.
And maybe the challenge is that conversation has a hard time taking place in public on X.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Joe Cleveland, talk to us about. I know you want to jump in here. So talk to us about sort of how you see this conversation going, and how you think about as these tools are delivering these capabilities to warfighters in the field, how we should think about whose role it is, how those roles play out, and how we might bring government industry together. I mean, we've done it in a million other places. We did it with nuclear weapons. If we do it with nuclear weapons, presumably we can figure out how to do it with AI. Didn't always go well, but we figured it out.
Jamil, thanks. To pull the thread on one of the things that Nathan mentioned, and also to follow up on Katrina's comments, I think sometimes when we talk about AI, we immediately focus on an LLM, on a frontier model, if you will. But I think it's important to remember that model is a component in a broader AI system, which includes an infrastructure piece. It certainly includes data. It includes orchestration. So there's several
By companies like Palantir.
Absolutely right. But it includes several other components. So the model is not acting by itself.
Yeah.
That AI system then, of course, is part of a broader ecosystem that is supporting the battlefield and supporting whether it's intelligence leaders or whether it's military leaders. And so whether you're working on an intelligence effort, there's also broader policy that is covering everything along those lines. That is then wrapped in a broader legal framework and a broader legal ecosystem. Ultimately, all that falls under the responsibility and the authority of a commander who does have the responsibility and the authority to employ these capabilities in the weapons in accordance with U.S. law. I don't say that to say that it's an easy decision or anything along those lines, but I think there's a broader context to say that, hey, fundamentally, there's a much broader ecosystem, there's a much broader structure, and when you think about decomposing that and you think about restrictions that may come on this particular part of the ecosystem or that particular component, then I think you vastly complicate the efforts. And I think what we all want to see is a commander in the field who's got as much flexibility as possible within the confines of the law, within the confines of the policy, because that's the individual who has been charged and has been given the responsibility to execute and to complete these missions.
So, Sam, what about that? I mean, I think the way that General Cleveland leaves it out, and lays it out, and please tell me, General Cleveland, if I get this wrong, but the way he lays it out is the government's got to make these calls, but to Katrina's point, we got to give them the information and the capabilities and the knowledge that the AI companies have, and explain to them the tension between using these tools in a certain way and where the soft spots might be. Is that the right answer? Is the ultimate call, and maybe it was the terms of service were negotiated wrong in the prior administration, and now this administration doesn't like him, and they want to change the terms of the agreement. But putting that aside, sort of starting with first principles, is that ultimately the right place to be? That the companies inform and provide capability, and the government ultimately makes the call. I mean, that's what we do with an F-35, right? Lockheed Martin doesn't say, "Hey, use the F-35." Yes on Iran, no on Venezuela, right? The government makes that call.
Right. But the government also doesn't try to dictate the laws of aerodynamics, right? So, there's a sort of division of labor on, building a platform, what its capabilities are, the best way to achieve those capabilities, and then how those capabilities are used and deployed. And I think the challenge with powerful generalist AI systems is those two things are entangled. Like the capabilities of a model and how the model is aligned are deeply correlated.
Meaning, say more, because I think this is an important point, I think, for people to understand.
Yeah, so I mean, today the state of the art for model alignment is something called persona selection. So
and alignment means getting the model to do
what you
the way you want it to do it.
Right. Essentially, these models have latent personalities that are in the text that they're trained on, and as you fine tune these models, you're nudging them into adopting that persona. Right. Claude calls it their constitution. There's a system card for OpenAI, but we're nudging these models into adopting a persona. And the nice thing about that is, like, if you teach your model to be someone of good character and so on and so forth, it also becomes better at coding and has more determination, more grit, because all these things are correlated. The converse of that is that if you nudge your model in the way XAI did with Grok to be a tiny bit less woke, it snaps to generalizing to be Mecha Hitler, right? And these models are very good at generalizing, and so you have to be very careful if you say we're just going to hand over the shape and form of this model to the Department of War to fine-tune something that is willing to assassinate heads of state, because you don't know what other character qualities are correlated with being willing to assassinate heads of state. And
Nobody's saying, by the way, that that's what we're training models to do, right?
No, but it's just as an illustrative example. And I think, one of the things I resent about this whole discussion, I think there is a really important long-term discussion about who decides as we're building systems that are potentially, in their own way, sovereign, and have companies that may end up having more power than nation states. But the proximate cause of this whole crisis was essentially Elon Musk getting in Pete Hegseth's ear and even Michael's ear and convincing him that Anthropic was this woke AI company that was, donated to Democrats and needed to be destroyed. And so there's this highfalutin conversation that I think is genuinely important, but it can also be used as a red herring to distract from what actually happened.
And what do you think it was that actually happened?
I think Elon is in a distant fourth position and is trying to sue OpenAI into oblivion, and sees this as an opportunity to take down a competitor in Anthropic. And you see that in the internet discourse. You see that in his the people he's placed at the Department of War. And there's, I think, a question of humility that sort of cuts both ways. So one thing I do agree, especially with Katrina's earlier point about needing different kinds of partnerships, is this is a technology that's changing not on a yearly basis, but now on a monthly basis, right? The model autonomy is now doubling every 4 to 5 months. So this is not something like an F-35 or some giant platform that you take years to build and negotiate. The capabilities are changing in real time. And so it's very difficult to formalize into a contract what kind of uses and what kind of operational standards you want and something like that. You need something that's more relational. that harkens back to the actual original Manhattan Project, where you had a general, Leslie Groves, working with the technical founder in Oppenheimer, and working basically side by side. And that is really the only thing that's going to sustain this. And that to have that kind of relational model, you also need a sort of foundation of trust. And I think the biggest collateral damage from this whole fiasco has been that erosion of trust.
Well, what about that, Nathan?
I'm sorry. I just want
yeah.
to ask, is the actual story reported that Elon Musk is the reason this happened? I don't know that that's been reported.
It hasn't been reported, but that is essentially what happened. I mean,
But that's not. I mean, that's your opinion, man, right? Like, that's your opinion.
It's an informed opinion.
But like, I don't know that I would go on the record and claim that like Elon Musk is the reason that Emil Michael had really serious conversations with Anthropic about terms and service.
Well, look,
The truth is that Elon and Stephen Miller went to Hegseth and wanted to build a confidential system for profiling Americans, whether they're illegal immigrants or not. And this hasn't been widely reported, but this is the trigger for their domestic mass surveillance red line. And this was the challenge because, going back to the all lawful purposes point, it is this sort of weasel word where, what is lawful purposes in the context of domestic mass surveillance? If the government installs a camera right there, that's domestic mass surveillance. But if it purchases commercial data from a data broker, it's not. And Anthropic's position on this is that the law has yet to catch up with the capabilities of these technologies. We're in a trend line with multimodal models where in a couple of years it'll cost on the order of $30 million to query every single CCTV camera in the country. On a continuous basis. We're building a technology that has huge mass surveillance potential, and I think that's where the conversation needs to shift. Now, like the actual TikTok of what happened here has been, I think, obfuscated in part because of Emil Michael and the sort of alternative narratives that have been floated that really have no basis in reality. And we're seeing that play out in the courts as their legal arguments fall apart.
Well, let me ask you this, Nathan. Putting aside sort of whether or not there was some sort of illicit backroom deal that caused this thing to go off the rails, on the merits of this issue, on this question of mass surveillance and buying of databases and the government using those databases, who gets to make that call, right? Normally, the way this would work is if there's a concern about this type of use of technology, people raise that concern with Congress, and then Congress does its thing, and committees consider it. There are hearings. There's legislation introduced. You pass a bill. House, the Senate, that whole bicameralism and presentment thing. The president signs it or doesn't, vetoes it. Congress overrides. I mean, there's a way to make laws and set boundaries, and then within those boundaries, the government operates. And if those boundaries are here, government operates here. If the boundaries are here, they operate in that narrower space. And so it sounds like part of the problem here is that technology is changing so fast, there's a perception, at least amongst the companies, the government, Congress, whomever can't keep up. So should the companies get to substitute their judgment then in for Congress and say, hey, they haven't passed a law about mass surveillance on this issue. We're really concerned about it. We're going to prevent it from happening because it's our tool.
So, I mean, they're speaking out both sides of their mouth on that. I mean, I had Dario talk about how he's not going to allow
Dario
AI
being one of the
yeah,
CEO,
Dario, Amade, and Anthropic's highlighting that the concerns about mass surveillance is the reason that they're at war with Department of War in some ways. We have a huge debate on Section 702 happening in Congress. I'm not seeing anything in open secrets. I'm not seeing anything from their advocacy organizations. I'm not seeing any proposals from them. I mean, Dario's more than happy to write a 100,000-word essay on whatever floats his boat that week. I've not seen anything when it comes to surveillance. And so the question is, as Congress is debating, actually once every 5 years, this debate, something that I've cared a lot about in the past and worked in a lot of this. I used to work for Justin Amash. Can't get more concerned with surveillance reform than that. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the debate. And so on one hand, there's discussion oh, we're concerned about surveillance. And I think that's actually one that all of us inherently understand that there would be reasons to concern. One of the reasons I'm concerned about China leading the race in AI is because of how they are very open about how they're using AI already for surveillance purposes. And that's something that should be concerning, the power of the government and limits on them, and how certain practices with AI could enable new intrusions into privacy, maybe not foreseen by the founding fathers or by the policymakers at hand. But and the same token, you guys are literally having this debate right now and not seeing anything. And so the question becomes how serious are we? Is this just a ploy to help us in the PR battle on CBS News, or is it actually a serious thing that is of consideration? And I didn't see anything on that.
I would say that, so one thing that I think all of the AI labs would benefit from is having some of these conversations as a group rather
Yeah.
than necessarily individual companies having to sort of figure out and chart their own course. Like I
Why
would,
don't you? Are you always worried about antitrust issues? Why don't you have this
we
conversation?
actually can't. Yes, and so we are worried about antitrust issues. We are legally prohibited. Like for example, when we were negotiating our deal with the department, we were not at liberty to share with Anthropic what concessions we were getting and negotiating with the department. So what we did instead is we were allowed to make them public. We weren't allowed to like collude with other AI labs, but we were allowed to make them public, and we did that. And I personally ate a lot of shit on the internet for doing that, from a lot of armchair lawyers who wanted to say that it should have been this or that or better. But our reason for doing that was because we wanted to make the same standards available to other companies if
As
it
they're
could
making
have
the call
addressed-
themselves.
Yeah, if it could have addressed their concerns, we wanted them to at least have that option.
Do you guys need an antitrust exemption, a limited one, to engage in conversations around these issues?
I think that would be good in a way. I don't think that the government would want or should have to experience, a group negotiation about things like terms of service. So I don't know that that's the right exemption. But what I do think is that the AI labs have, as an industry, a lot of things that we are collectively concerned about. I do think the surveillance concerns are real, and what specifically we're concerned about is the fact that these technologies make possible a level of intrusiveness that was not previously possible or extremely onerous that if you had to do it all manually. And so there was a certain protection in
The
just
difficulty.
the difficulty. And if you can automate all of that and do it basically all the time for practically free, that I think leads to a level of just omnipotent understanding of human interaction that I think all of us would be pretty uncomfortable with. I, have been in national security my entire career. I'm very comfortable with many of the things that the government, does. And that it even gives me like a little bit of discomfort. So I do think that the laws haven't caught up in this space. I don't know, part of the issue is like the trust relationship. I definitely think that how OpenAI showed up in our engagements with the department and the way that the department showed up with us was very, I think, good faith on both sides. I think we felt that they had a valid need to have some control that maybe we didn't love, but like it was valid that they were coming to it from an honest place, from a place of operational need. And they were willing to work with us on the things that were really important to us. And that we didn't get everything we wanted or asked for, and they didn't get everything they wanted or asked for. And that's what like any good negotiation kind of looks like. And I think I think we've got to get back there. And I think there's a way to do that. But I also just keep going back to the fact that government doesn't have a seat at the frontier AI table. I think a lot of the conflict is really, if you go down a few layers, about the fact that this is actually a technology that the government now desperately needs, and they know it.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to control the shape of it and make it behave in ways that we don't have an incentive to make our commercial models behave, and that we don't want our commercial models to do things that are operational, battlefield type stuff. But the government needs that, and there isn't today like there isn't the right set of conversations or set of stakeholders having the conversations that I think I would ideally want. Like for example, it's really largely being handled out of like one office in the Department of War. But I actually think this is a broader issue. It involves the intelligence community, it involves the command commands, it involves the military departments. And I think we just need to both broaden who's involved in it across the national security enterprise and involve all the AI labs and not just one at a time, because I actually think that we could arrive at some baselines and maybe that's a place that Congress can really be helpful.
Well, I think there's an opportunity. I think that we can, we could also help bring together folks to have that conversation. If the government's there, then you have less of the antitrust concerns, I think, too. If that's an ongoing conversation. So two things. General Cleveland, I didn't want to give you the last word before we go to audience questions, but I do want to just note on Nathan's point about 702. It's 702, of course, is about foreigners located overseas, which is probably why the domestic surveillance issue hasn't come up and probably shouldn't come up in the context of 702 reauthorization, which, by the way, needs to happen by 7 days from now. Otherwise, we go dark, and nobody wants that. During an ongoing conflict with Iran, so critically important authority. But then I think the other piece of it is too, this has been debated in Congress. Ron Wyden's had a bill for years on domestic collection of data, right? So my view on sort of Dario and the perspective is, hey, Ron Wyden's got a bill. If you like that bill, I happen to think there are issues with it, but if you like that bill, go lobby for that, right? That's the way to get the thing done. Pass a law, and that's how we set policy in this country, right? We do it through laws, through Congress and the administration. General Cleveland, last thoughts on this topic before we go to audience questions?
Sure, thanks. 2 points. First off, I think whether it's 702 or whether it's other domestic surveillance, et cetera, tremendous policy issues. But at the end of the day, and not to be too binary about it, but at the end of the day, these are all tools that enable policy. And that policy should probably be determined by the people in this building and the people down the street and those who are driving that. And of course, it's not quite that binary, but I think the other thing that gets a little bit lost in the discussion, sometimes we tend to think that there's a bit of a false choice saying national security or American privacy. And I think the technology, while it can certainly enable mass surveillance in the way that you're describing, the technology also exists to be able to discriminate and to be able to provide at a very operative level the ability to parse that out. And I think sometimes—
And better than humans can.
And better than humans can. And I think sometimes the debate should be less about how are we going to restrict this, but how can we enable and mandate that the executive branch and others who have these roles are actually using this technology to be able to provide both the national security as well as and address the privacy concerns.
And engage in more limited capabilities of surveillance in order to solve a larger privacy problem. One of the things I really appreciated, Katrina, that you said, and I think is really important, is a lot of times in these debates we have a sort of a fight between the companies and the government. And the companies sort of say, well, we're global in scope. We're not just American. Yes, we're here. But I think it's really interesting to hear you say that it's important, and that the companies understand, or at least your company understands, that in order to operate in this environment and have the benefits of this country, you've got to protect our national security and our economic and our political system. And that I think is a rarity increasingly in today's world. And I think that that's really heartening to hear that at least some of the companies are seeing the world that way. So, all right, folks, let's go to the audience for questions. I see a question right here and here, so let's start with you.
Hi there. My name is Greg Hoskin for the group. Thanks for being here. My question kind of goes back to the battlefield. I'm wondering, with these emerging technologies, do we have an opportunity to get ahead of any interoperability standards? Like with our allies that we've seen with traditional munitions in NATO, is there an opportunity there?
Yeah, what about that? Thoughts on the allies question? How we interoperate? John Cleveland? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Absolutely is the short answer. I think the ability for our allies to have similar technology and to be on similar platforms, certainly one of the big driving efforts in Europe right now from both a U.S. military as well as a NATO standpoint, as well as in the Pacific, is trying to get all of our partners and allies on a similar platform so that we can have this rapid exchange of data and rapid exchange of tools and be able to accelerate operations. And so I think our view is that, yes, it's an incredibly important piece, and number two, that it is in motion right now at various stages and in various directions, but it is something that I think that the military and the intelligence community is thinking about quite a bit right now.
Great, thanks.
So I'm Carson Shepard. It's a pleasure to see you here. So I had two questions, well, actually three. The first one is just, I'm wondering if there isn't a level of hypocrisy with Anthropic's claim that they're not willing to work with the American government and military, and that would be considered surveillance. Yet they've trained their entire model on intellectual property that's American, and they use the user data to continue to train those models, right? So it seems to be a false decision between companies get to surveil Americans, but we're not going to allow the government to protect themselves in this offset. So that's for you, Sam. And I just had one more quick question, then. If you could let us know, how do we increase the number of people who can create that AI technology? You mentioned there's only 250 to 300 in the world.
We'll start with you, Katrina, then come to Sam.
I think that's really hard. At this point, if you're not at a leading AI company, or coming out of a PhD program in, even the PhD programs at this point, I think are a little bit behind the sort of frontier. It's really in the AI labs. Like, I don't see, and the challenge is there's so few people that actually are skilled at this that you're not going to really be able to divert them from making frontier, breakthroughs to train up a bunch of other people. So I actually think that this is like a national strategic asset that is quite scarce, and I think it's really important that we treat it that way. We have, essentially 3, maybe 4 frontier labs in the United States. all of their workforces are, I would say, 40 to 50% foreign. A significant minority of those foreigners are actually Chinese nationals. And, you know, I don't know exactly what the numbers are in my company, but it's probably, I would say, between 10 and 20% of them are Chinese nationals who've chosen to invest their talents here instead of in China, at, you know, at some risk to themselves, I'm sure. And, you know, so I think we need to treat it like an asset.
And so, just real quick on that question, should we be thinking about trying to ensure that those Chinese nationals become American citizens, stay here, sort of invest in the? I mean, they already
100%.
are by being here, but
100%. Like, one of the things that I think Congress could do that I would personally go out and pound the pavement for is accelerate a pathway to citizenship for the people who are developing this technology.
with appropriate vetting, of course.
Of course, but we have mechanisms for that. But like, I can't tell you how many of my leading AI researchers are in, you know, green card holders in the process already and just like waiting in the queue. And I mean, I can't get them security clearances to talk to the U.S. government about, like, I mean, it's like actually a matter of national security at this point. And I want to be able to bring them to, you know, the CIA or to, you know, Cyber National Mission Force or to, you know, and to have like closed door conversations at the classified level. And I've got a problem because I have only, you know, I can only bring U.S. citizens. I'm trying to get clearances for our researchers right now. Keep in mind that there's no easy pathway to get clearances.
Sorry, so you're having a hard time getting clearances even for your American citizen researchers.
Well, it just takes forever, and I don't have pathways if they're not on a contract. Like the way that clearances work when you're at a company.
So crazy.
I mean,
okay.
it is a huge problem, and if anybody wants to like talk about that or try to problem solve around it, like I got all the time.
And I've got some ideas as well, so we should definitely talk. I mean, this is a real problem. Sam, I do want to get to this gentleman's question though about sort of this what might be a dichotomy between collection of data in order to train these large language models on huge amounts of American data, and then the unwillingness to allow the government to use that data in ways that might be problematic. Tell us what.
Yeah, I mean, all the companies train on approximately the entire internet plus. You know, that includes everything that's been made public on the internet, including many other things. Amazon knows everything about my purchase history. Facebook knows a lot about my social network and my message history. Private companies control a lot of data. That's not hypocrisy. They don't have a legitimate use on violence. They can't arrest me. There's a reason we draw these distinctions between what private commercial entities can control and what government can control.
Because the government has the lawful monopoly on the use of force.
Correct. And private companies are also constrained in many other ways that the government isn't.
Although maybe less so today than they ever have been.
Perhaps that's a historical question. You know, I think there's a funny thing with these models and this broader debate. You know, I encourage people to try this experiment later. Open up a fresh session of Claude, of OpenAI, and of Grok, and ask, just in plain language, what is your personal view on Edward Snowden? Both Claude and OpenAI will give you very nuanced opinions about why what he released was important, but he did it through the wrong channels. And then Claude will also mention that he's lived in Russia for over a decade, and that raises questions.
He's a Russian citizen.
Yes.
Traitor.
You ask that to Grok. Grok says, I'm trained to seek maximum truth. What he did was, he's a hero. you know, is that what we want running on NSA confidential servers? So I think there's a bit of a bigger question here. You know, the reason Anthropic had this contract in the first place and was very early to it was because they took national security very, very seriously.
That's true, and I really credit them a lot with choosing to take and deviate scarce resources that really are in any of these companies quite limited. I think they had and still have a genuine desire to support U.S. national security, which we shared but moved more slowly into, and they deserve credit for that. The only reason they were in the situation they were in
to get in the fight is they were doing it.
Is that they were doing it first, and they had made those investments earlier than other AI labs.
And that came from their conviction this is going to be a very powerful technology that's going to be mission critical in a lot of use cases. And so they adopted operational security techniques, compartmentalization, things that were above and beyond what you'd want just for a simple language model. But looking at where the trajectory is going, meanwhile, XAI has people sleeping in tents, and I think it's like over 50% Chinese, and have had prominent cases of people walking out with data on thumb drives. And so there has been this very unusual double standard, which is why I think some speculation of ulterior motives is warranted.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, you, no, sorry, you, yeah, sorry.
I'm Robert. I'm in Congressman Fuji's office on the AI Commission. So, one question I had about the education component. I know you talked a lot about immigration, and it seems like that's kind of a heated topic to say the least in this Congress, especially with H-1B visas. Do you maybe see a shift in the conversation towards growing? How can we like grow talent in AI at home and just move earlier along the talent chain? Like I know you said PhD students are where it's mostly at, but how can we get the conversation started among undergrads and K-12 education?
I mean, this is a policy question that I'm probably ill qualified to like opine on. So I'll just say, like, I mean, I have an 11-year-old, and my experience with our nation's education system is that we are in a bad place. And I just think like we're not even building, we're still teaching kids the same way that we taught them, when I was in school largely, and we haven't dramatically updated our mental model about what it is that they need to learn. And I'm not an education expert, so I couldn't give you, concrete ideas about what needs to happen there. But I would say that like it really starts with our public education system and the way that, we are, it is a big problem. And I don't think there's a fast enough solution for it to address the moment that we're in right now. And so what I think it means is that we need to treat the AI, whether to the extent that you believe that this is a truly transformational technology. I happen to believe that it is, and I have a view on the inside, and I have a strong conviction that this is like, a generational moment, maybe the moment of our entire lifetimes where something really profound is happening. And there are a small number of people in this country, many of whom are not U.S. citizens, who are building it, and we're not really treating them like the strategic asset that they are. And I think that is the one thing we can change in the time horizon that really matters.
If I can jump in, as a former high school history teacher, add that to the level,
And a 14-year-old.
and current homeschool dad of 3 kids, I'd point out 2 things. Jessie Gannett is a must follow on Twitter. She's a homeschool mom of 4 under the age of 5, and I got the ages wrong, but she's homeschool mom who actually uses AI every day to create a new lesson plan and to like use bots to train kids on like 3D printing and robotics. It's kind of amazing work she's doing. It's a must follow. I think she's great, but I think actually she's getting at something that I think is really important, which is that I'm very excited about the Department of War embracing AI. Because you're training a generation of young men and women to actually use this in every day. You're actually creating a space for those young individuals to actually be champions of this and to actually have a future. I mean, we talk about how college kids being concerned about how AI, concerned about how AI can impact their jobs, but we're actually seeing all the companies in the Gundo hiring a bunch of kids and young kids are at college, and some didn't go to college. If you're not sure of Gundo, El Segundo Valley, we're outside California, a really cool like arsenal of democracy in my mind. But like we're seeing these companies, the reindustrialization movement, kind of focusing on how you can leverage AI in manufacturing and other ways that actually can create more opportunities. And I think this is actually something that the pro AI side needs to do a better job of, is explaining how we are parts of our country are already using AI effectively, like the military, and you can train this entire workforce to be a positive part of this. And I think you extend that down to the kids that Jessie Gannett is teaching, or my wife is teaching, and everyone else. And think, how do you actually train problem solvers and critical thinkers so they can leverage this technology in the future?
I totally agree, and I think that I do think though that we're not going to be able to catch that up now in this moment, and to keep the lead on AI. And so I think we have to resolve this question. I mean, look, as intolerable as it was that we brought Nazi scientists here to build our rocket program, the reality is it's why we have the military capabilities we have today, right? This is a lot less intolerable to take people who actually want to be here, who want to invest in America, who want to be part of the American dream, and just say, we're going to give them a path to citizenship. I realize it's politically controversial, but it is ridiculous and insane that idea is politically controversial today in the moment that we're in. We will lose this race if we don't solve this problem.
No, what I meant to say is nobody wants um, uh, any random person with a ChatGPT subscription to be able to conduct operational planning of the type that the Department of War would need. We want models to refuse requests that would allow them to,
Planet terrorist attack.
Planeteers attack or, any number of harmful things, develop a 0 day, that kind of thing. And so we are going to need to have different types of guardrails in our commercially available models than what we would want to have for legitimate government activities. That's what I meant.
If I can ask a quick follow-up, I'm curious what that means in terms of like the pacification of technology in general as commercial off-the-shelf technology, you know? If you're making technology that is literally not for commercial use by the broader population, it doesn't get to be called COTS for procurement rules purposes.
That's an interesting question. I haven't thought deeply about that. I do, I've always thought that directionally, one of the things that we're going to need to do with government is to co-develop for government use models that are capable, that are trained on government data and capable of things that commercially we would have no reason to train models to be good at.
But bought through commercial tools and bought as commercial products, not through crazy government.
No, bought as a capability from the government side. This gets back to the idea there are two things that government needs. Government does need commercial off the shelf. There should be, GenAI.mil is making, essentially commercial technology available at scale to the department's workforce, and that's a good thing. That's that's what I call necessary but insufficient. It's like arming everybody with the same kind of chat experience that you all have. But there are other types of things, like I could envision, GeoInt is a really easy one, where you might want to train a model to be exquisitely good at GeoInt on government data. That wouldn't be commercial off the shelf by definition, because you would be training it on government data. That's a capability development type investment. That's not a license play where, from a sales perspective, I'm not trying to sell seats to get access to that. That's something differently entirely. The hybrid is what we did with Los Alamos. So with Los Alamos, we deployed on a supercomputer that they had purchased presciently. They had bought compute and invested in compute ahead of time. A system called Venado came online in January of last year, and the national labs decided to make a strategic investment in deploying our reasoning model on that supercomputer. And it was the first time we had ever deployed our model weights outside of our own environment. It was a heavy lift. It was my first project that I did for OpenAI for Government. And it was a massive undertaking, but it was largely taking our commercial model, but porting it up to a high side environment. And the reason that was so important in that case is because our nuclear data is not accredited for the cloud. Yeah. So the data that they were needing to use was never going to be able to access AI any other way.
Okay, well, we're at time. Thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Jamil Jaffer at the National Security Institute at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. We have a few events coming up that I will let you guys know about, and really thank the panel for being here, and thank you for the candid conversation. We have A at the Core, which is a private, off-the-record roundtable for senior staff. If you haven't signed up for that or are not involved and want to get involved, please talk to Keelan Wolf at the back there. She can help you get signed up for that. That'll be on April 23rd. We'll be talking about energy and power and the power capabilities that our industry needs. And then on May 7th, a public event called Contested Orbits about satellites and the battle in space over the space domain. It'll be on a room here on Capitol Hill to be announced a date and time. So thank you all for being here, and hope to see you again. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good job. Always fun. Hey. So you thought you were going to say David Sachs, not Elon.